Today I want to talk a little bit about working with the spine in Qigong, and specifically I want to talk about a couple of different stages of what it feels like in terms of the physical mechanics of playing with the spine, how that feels after you practice and you move around, and then it's kind of a little bit into what the energetics feel like when you start to really release stuck energy in the spine. And there's a lot to say about that, so I'm only going to talk about a couple different levels of it, just based on my experience and trying to help you relate to what things to look for in as you do spine work. The first thing is, in terms of physical mechanics, talking about an exercise like the Taoist spine stretch, where you're trying to release vertebra by vertebra into the different sections of the spine. It does two major things. The first one is it helps you develop better awareness around the spine. So to actually get a sense for what the physical column of the spine feels like, right? Most of your spine, when you look at it, most of us tend to think about it as the stuff that sticks out in the back. And that's where the name comes from, the name for spine, right? Spine is from the Latin for thorn. So the thorny parts that stick out in the back, that's how most of us identify the spine. But if you look at a skeleton and you look at the anatomy of it, most of the spine, the big vertebral bodies, the heavy part of the spine, the protective part, is about a third of the way in, anywhere from a third to the half. So when you start to do the spine stretch and you're curling over one way and then building it back up the other way, you're actually getting a sense about halfway into the body of how those moving parts work. So that's the first big thing, is lengthening that spinal column along its axis. It's not flexion, it's not extension, and it's not flexion. It's axial length. And so when you do that, what you then take away from it in terms of movement stuff is that you have a much clearer sense where the middle of your body is. And this leads to much better rotational movement. And then eventually, later you get into the kind of loading and releasing of the spine. That's all separate. But in terms of your axis, central axis of rotation, you're starting to orient there. The other big thing that the spine stretch does that's kind of unique is on the way up. So I'm at the bottom of the spine stretch. On the way up, I'm building from the bottom up again. I'm not pulling from the head and shoulders. I'm stretching and opening the legs and the quad as I come up. And so that actually builds the connection between the legs and the spine. So instead of thinking about an individual part of your back hurting, you learn to relax all the big muscles in the back and make the connection so that the legs can support the spine. So again, rotation, clearer sense of rotational movement, longer spine, which if you sit on the computer all day, you start to have less of a long spine, right? You want that long spine. And then, because of the way the spine stretch works, you have a better connection between the legs and the spine. And you're going to work on that physical version for a long time. What you're going to do first is just even feel the spine, the sections of the back, right? You start from the back. You can get the back before the front, and you'll work in big chunks of the back before you can refine it down. So you're going to work in smaller and smaller stripes eventually, and you'll also get closer and closer into the spine. See, at first it's just like this one big band, but eventually you want to be feeling there right along the spine. So it's almost like there's these little hands squeezing your spine that you learn to release them and relax them. And as you get closer to the spine, the muscles that support the spine and the tissue that supports the spine is deeper and deeper in. So it's this kind of outside-in process, and then back towards the middle, sort of center to periphery, in both directions, until you really are feeling that sense of stability from the spinal column itself. The energetics of the spine, that's a whole different thing. So what you want to think about there, and let me just give you kind of what it feels like to me, and you can go on from there, without getting into the more sophisticated Qigong principles and all that, the more sophisticated practices. Think of the energetics of working with the spine as a natural continuum from really letting the physical body release. We talk about this continuum a lot, right? And I don't like to look at them as totally distinct paradigms. I think it's much more useful to get people along in terms of practice, thinking of it saying it's a natural feeling, the energetics of something is a natural extension of the feeling awareness that you develop when you pay attention to what's going on physically. So what happens when the energy of the spine starts to release, just talking about the releasing phase, is that all of a sudden, I guess the best way to say it is that you tend not to notice when something is shut down energetically. If you did this and held your shoulder like this all the time, eventually you wouldn't start to notice it. It would just be part of how it feels to go around. But the drain that it has on your whole system because of all the inefficiency it creates in terms of movement, in terms of discomfort, if you're living in sort of energetic debt like this, you don't notice how much it's sapping your energy. And the day that you get that shoulder to release and feel everything open up again, you're going to feel like you have tons more energy. Something like that is what happens when you begin to release the energy of the spine. So again, same exact method. You can do this through the spine stretch, but your sense of refinement of what you're letting go of goes deeper into the body, and it starts to happen at a more subtle level. So then the net effect is not like, oh God, now I have to worry about the spine. Everything fills up. And you have this reserve that was untapped before that's now just kind of letting you move through your day with a little more juice, a little more gracefully, and in a more relaxed way. The same kind of thing starts to happen internally when you start to release the energy of the organs. It's this untapped reserve that was like this shoulder being stuck here all the time. And all of a sudden, as it releases and fills out, it just gets easier to kind of move around, and like I said, a whole untapped potential emerges that you didn't know before. So that's a little bit about what it's like to first go through stages of feeling awareness, to actually hone in on the column and the moving parts of the spine and getting them to lengthen along their axis. And then it leads you naturally, if you do in this kind of 70% dissolving, releasing, letting go mentality, leads you into tapping into the energetics of the spine. So good luck with that process.